15th study session. I'm going to open the meeting. We start with public comment on agenda items.
Oh, let me get it. Okay, sorry.
We don't have anybody signed up on public right to speak in person. I'll ask our city clerk if we have anybody on the Zoom format that would like to speak on items that are on the agenda for the study session.
We do not.
Thank you. We'll close public comment and agenda items and move on to our agenda item number 1, Jefferson County Multi-Hazard Plan 2021 update. City Manager Goff.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. You might have remembered this item. This was on the agenda a couple months ago, I think. Now, has it been a couple months? June? Oh, June. Mr. Westberg was very ill and he couldn't speak. Imagine that, Mark not being able to speak. So we postponed it, but he is back this evening, and this item will come back to you in, I think, a few weeks for actual approval. But Mr. Westberg.
Yeah, thank you, and I'll apologize for the quality of my voice. It's still not doing great for some reason. Honestly, the not speaking was worse than the not breathing some days. Again, we're just here to talk about the 2021 update. We updated the Jeffco multi-hazard plan back in 2016. FEMA requires us to update it every 5 years, and Jefferson County, their emergency management services are the ones that run this. We just are participants as a stakeholder and an active person on the committee. And Jesse touched my screen. There we go. So what's in the plan? This is the cover of the plan. It says state review draft still, but the state has reviewed it. FEMA has reviewed it. It has been given conditional approval pending adoption by all the various agencies. The stuff that's in here, if you look at the table of contents, which I included that part in your packet along with the executive summary, is the community profile, the planning process. So basically, community profile is just, it talks about what Jefferson County is, what makes it up, where they are, population, all those kind of things. The planning process is what we all go through to update the plan. The risk assessment is looking at all the possible hazards. There was one added this year. I'll bet you all can guess what it is. Mitigation strategy, what can we do to try to prevent those hazards from becoming a problem? And then there's the implementation and maintenance. And the maintenance is the part where we just have to provide an update to council every year and try to get some of the things done that are in the plan. And then there's an annex, there's a specific annex for each jurisdiction. So in the Wheat Ridge Annex, we have background information, just talking about Wheat Ridge as a city, the fact we've been around for over 50 years and things like that. We have the community profile, again, just a very drilled down version of what's in our community, what kind of businesses, what kind of, how much housing we have, all those kind of things. The hazard identification risk assessment is, again, taking that list of hazards we developed for the whole county and applying those then to the city. Some of the ones the county has as a higher risk, county-wide overall, will actually be a lower risk for the city because we don't really have avalanches in Wheat Ridge, and we don't have subsidence in Wheat Ridge. So some of those things that are a risk for the county aren't risks for us, and that's why we do this. That's why we have a specific community annex. Then there's a community asset inventory that we also have. Then once we get all that sort of data put together, then we do a vulnerability assessment and then a capability assessment. But the vulnerability is how vulnerable is Wheat Ridge and their residents and their businesses and the buildings and everything else to these various hazards, and then what is our capability in being able to respond to those hazards. And then again, there's the plan implementation and maintenance, and then we each, as a jurisdiction, end up with a set of mitigation actions. We carried a lot of our mitigation actions over, and then we added one new one because we have to. We have to add a new one whenever we update the plan. We also got some of our mitigation things done. So the hazards that we have as Wheat Ridge as high significance is dam failure, flood, pandemic, and then tornado. Those are the ones that we have the highest significance of. We've never had a tornado in Wheat Ridge, so I'm not really sure it's a high significance for us, but if it happens, it's going to be really, really bad. Medium significance things are hailstorms, severe winter storms, wildfire, and windstorms. And so the things at the top of the list are things that if they happen in Wheat Ridge, we're probably going to have some loss of life if we're not careful. The things down below are going to cause property damage, but hopefully not cause any loss of life. Our assets. So the inventory of all the properties in Wheat Ridge, not city-owned things, this is all the properties, is just under $6 billion. We have 161 critical facilities, and we have a host of natural, cultural, and historic resources in Wheat Ridge, as defined by the feds, not necessarily defined by the rest of the world. In the 100-year floodplain, because that's the part that's near and dear to my heart, and honestly is our most highest risk kind of disaster. Dam failure is kind of the same thing, it's just from a different source. We have commercial property of estimated losses of $1.3 million, industrial 4.1, residential $36.5 million in losses, and then we have 12 critical facilities that are in the floodplain. So this is our current flood map of the things that are, and all those little dots are facilities and things that are in those hazard zones. Don't expect you necessarily to be able to see this, just want you guys to know what's in there. So our previous hazard events is in 1979, there was a flood caused at Maple Grove Dam because a teenager went and cut open they had what was called a Fabridam. It was like this big inflatable thing that was in the spillway, and he thought it'd be fun to cut it with a knife and see what happened. Our police department scrambled up and down the streets and warned everybody to get out of their houses, and there wasn't a lot of damage from it, but there was a pretty good scare there for a while on what might be happening. In 2009, we had a hail windstorm. That's the thing most people think is a tornado, but it was a microburst because it was all straight line winds. Tornado-ish in the amount of damage it caused. In 2013, we had some localized flooding due to rain and hail. Now, we dodged a bullet in 2013. The folks up north got hammered in 2013. If that storm pattern had shifted 20 or 30 miles south, then we probably would have experienced a lot of what they experienced up in Fort Collins and Loveland and Boulder and some of those other places. In spring of 2015, an 8-week period, we received 13.5 inches of rain, which is nearly our annual rainfall. So we received a host of phone calls from residents on basement. My sump pump's running all day long. I said, well, it's been a very, very wet year. And then in 2017, we had another hailstorm, and that was much larger hail than the 2009 storm that we had. But it was a big deal, or the 2013 storm. I lost a window at my house in 2017. So the capability assessment, the things they look at there are, what are our regulations? What do we regulate? Are we regulating things that try to prevent people from being in a hazard? What's our administrative and technical capabilities? What's our physical capabilities? And then a big part of that, especially for the floodplain stuff, is our community rating system. That's what CRS stands for. But the activities that we do there, and that's the list of things that we do that we get a lot of points for, that don't just give us points, it actually helps mitigate the hazard that we're looking at there, which is the floodplain hazard. So the things that we've completed, we did an operations plan in conjunction with Mile High Flood District and the Maple Grove Reservoir folks, the Consolidated Mutual Water Company, to change their spillway operation. The previous spillway operation was, when the flood gets high enough, we just drop everything and flood everybody downstream. So what the operation is now is the flood starts to come up, we've got lots of data when a storm happens because there's gauges upstream, there's rainfall gauges, there's river gauges, so we know a lot of what's going to happen there. And so instead of just dropping everything, we sort of drop things incrementally so that the waters can start to get out of the reservoir without impacting the folks downstream in a bad way. If we have a really big storm, then we might have to do that. In 2013, they were this close to opening the spillways because the dam was at the level that they should have. But because of all this data they had, they saw that the flows coming from downstream were going down and that the reservoir could handle going up above flood stage by a few inches, and that's what was going to happen. And so they didn't drop the spillways in 2013. So that's a really important thing that we've done. The other thing we did, we improved our CRS rating to a Class 5, and that's part of the National Flood Insurance Program. And so all of our residents get a 25% discount on their flood insurance. So if someone complains about what they're paying, it would be higher if we weren't a Class 5 community. So we're continuing to try to do things to improve that whole situation for folks. The ongoing things, just because a lot of these things just take a lot of time, is the Clear Creek and Sloan's Lake, and at the very bottom, Lena Gulch. We're actually remapping. They're at different stages. Clear Creek, we just finished the maps, the local maps, and now they're at the state for review. There will be soon. The district is going to be, Mile High Flood District is going to take those to their board on Thursday of this week to get those accepted. And if those are accepted, then they're going to ship them off to the state for a 3 to 4 month review there. And once that happens, then it goes through the FEMA process. We're still about 2 to 4 years away from being able to adopt those maps as our official maps as the things that regulate flood insurance. The Sloan's Lake is all done. They're actually going through. We just started the federal process. We're about to start the federal process there. We put in as one of our goals to improve the storm sewer on Wadsworth, which we're in the process of implementing starting like in a week or two. When they start that construction, that storm sewer, upgrading the storm sewer and adding a water quality pond at the north end of that to help clean the waters a little bit before they go into the creek. I have a hope that we can become a Class 4 CRS community and give everybody a 30% discount. We're halfway there point-wise. There are some other hurdles we have to jump through, but we're going to be evaluating those over the next year or two to see if that's a possibility. Floodplain projects on Clear Creek and Lena Gulch. We've got a couple of projects identified that would remove people from the floodplain. So we've got to get the mapping all finished before we do that. Become a National Weather Service storm-ready community. Jefferson County was going to do that, and we were going to partner with them to do it, and then they dropped it. And so it's just one of those things that we'll probably have to try to do just as a jurisdiction, just to show that we're ready if a storm hits, and then we get some more points for that. But it might also result in us changing our process a little bit just so that we are more ready for it. Channel 8 and website updates. We try to keep those both the Channel 8 slides that we have on floodplain and the website updated. I need to do that. I've been a little busy on WADS for the last few years, but I need to get those updated. Our stormwater program, we try to regulate, that construction sites don't dump a bunch of dirt on our streets and then they get in the storm sewer and then they get into the creek. And then maintenance operations, just all the stuff that the great guys down at Public Works do to maintain the stuff that we have. And then the Lena Gulch floodplain mapping and master plan, they're in the process of finishing up the flows, and then we'll start working on the mapping. That should happen at the beginning of next year. So the reason to adopt the plan is the Federal Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000, it's actually that recent, requires that we update it in order to qualify for pre or post-disaster mitigation funding. Most of the projects we've identified so far are too expensive to have a good benefit cost analysis, but we're hoping that as we get these revised maps and things, we'll be able to pare the scope of those projects, or they'll have more impact so that we can cross that magic number of 1, that we have more benefit than cost, and we can try to apply for those. The other thing too is if we have a disaster, then we're eligible for post-disaster mitigation funding by virtue of adopting the plan. The council adopted the plan back in 2016 in August. And Jeffco received a grant to update the plan in 2020, so they go out and apply for a grant, and then they can hire a consultant to do all this. And this really is essential to our CRS program, having this plan. We get 240 points, which is half of what we need to move up a class. So if we don't adopt the plan, then we lose those points, and we possibly bounce back down to a class 6. So again, just to sort of reiterate the CRS stuff that we've got, there's only 9 other communities in Colorado right now that are class 5 or better, and there's like 161 out of several, like 15,000 communities in the entire country that are class 5 or better. We get a 25% discount for that. Takes 500 points to move up a class. The plan is worth 240, and like I said, we're about halfway to a class 4 now. We've got a couple of other things. We've got hurdles, prerequisites they call them. I call them hurdles to jump through before we could actually pull that off. The other thing that happens is we have to do an annual report on our mitigation actions, so I'll just need to come back to council once a year and let you know how we're doing on all those mitigation actions that we listed. And I think I'm done. And I apologize for bouncing past my question slide. So, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Rustberg. Council questions? Councilwoman Noslerbeck.
So with the new floodplain mapping, how will residents be notified that the floodplain mapping is changing? In my own neighborhood, I think it'll probably have a pretty big impact. Is that part of all of this plan, I guess, is?
It's a little bit
outreach?
peripheral to this plan. Now that we've got the maps kind of finalized, we had an open house. The Mile High Flood District hosted an open house for all of Clear Creek, so from Golden all the way through Adams County. We had several Wheat Ridge residents. There were only a few people showed up, but like 2 of them were Wheat Ridge residents, so I was proud our folks were representing there. And they had some really good detailed questions too. As soon as we get through the state process, then, which should happen about the time I have my annual meeting next spring, then we might, if it's, it's going to be like a month later, then I'll just delay the meeting a month to coincide it. So what we typically done is we'll mail out a letter to folks. That we have 3 different letters when we get the maps. Is we'll mail a letter that says you're in and you're still in, but your situation's better. You were in, but now you're going to be out in a couple of years. And then you were out before, but now you're going to be in. I think we have none of those this time. So the mapping has changed since December. The number of properties in the floodplain is the same, but the floodway has shrunk dramatically from what was presented in the draft maps. They went out, based on comments that we all made, they went back and re-looked at it and remapped that part of it. It's much, much better for our folks. We still do have a fair amount of folks in the Clearvale neighborhood, downstream of 44th Avenue, that will still be in the floodway. So once we get all this done, we're gonna next year we'll be relooking at doing sort of a mini master plan update for Clear Creek to say, hey, we've got 30% less water in the creek. What does the project we identified back in 2008 do for us if we've got that much less water? Do we get more PLAC? Can we make the project smaller? What are the things we can do? Is something we might look ahead to for future funding from City Council.
Okay. Can I ask another question, or?
Please go for it.
And then, with Wheat Ridge being like a farming community that's now not totally a farming community, sorry, Councilmember Weaver, but we have a lot of diversions and like former irrigation ditches that are dammed. And in the process of the floodplain mapping or any of the kind of efforts to mitigate, have we identified some of those? And I'm asking because in my neighborhood, we've had some, breakage of those, they're not dams, but they call them, I think, diversions. Yes. And it causes some, not damage to homes, but to some property and stuff.
Yeah, we have no regulatory authority over the irrigation ditch companies at all. It's all regulated by the state. The best we can do is if they go out and make a mess, is our stormwater guy can go out and enforce on them to clean it up. The irrigation flows in those diversions don't really impact the flood. So imagine, if you will, at the 44th Avenue Bridge, a 100-year flood is up near the bottom of that bridge. So that's what those little diversion structures do is nothing compared to what the water coming down the creek is happening at that time. So it's not something we really regulate. Certainly if someone's having a problem with the irrigation ditch, we can hook them up with the ditch company to respond. I know that we've had several people complain about their yards being wet all the time because of the irrigation ditch and stuff. We don't have any regulatory authority over them.
Thank you. Councilwoman Weaver.
Thank you for bringing that up, Councilor Noslerbeck. I do have some questions about that because I'm getting several questions from constituents about what is a city ditch, that where the infrastructure is breaking down, not necessarily ditch, but drainage structure, and versus what is one of these irrigation diversions. And I'm just curious if we have maps of ownership as far as the ditch companies and so that people know what a ditch, what a diversion is for agricultural water versus what a public, right? Because oftentimes the ditches have been put underground under a street, and that's where, being both a owner of water and dealing with the city issues, sometimes it's a not my problem kind of deal, and then you have a neighbor that is neither a ditch owner nor is it their drainage issue. And I'm just curious if, because it really does become a disaster if somebody's front yard is flooded and it's headed towards a crawl space. So is this something that a map of, or just some information, or maybe Councilor Noslerbeck and I can work on something that that we would work with you, Mark, on having that information more available so that people are able to call the right place, or even as counselors, we can find out?
Yeah, we could certainly do something along those lines. We have a list of ditch companies and who we have as their current ditch rider, which is the guy that's out there running around during the summertime trying to keep the water flowing. They have a real vested interest in keeping the water flowing.
Yes.
What most ditch companies will tell you about ownership is most of them own the water in the ditch, and that's it. They don't own anything else. If there's a pipe that's been put in to get it under a street or even under a property, that's the responsibility of that property owner, which if it's under a street is us.
Right.
So when a pipe fails that's carrying irrigation water, we're generally on the hook to go replace that.
Sure.
Most of those diversion structures are maintained by them, because if they don't, then they don't
Right.
get their water for the ditch. Although somehow we got, I don't know if snooker's the right word, but we ended up paying for the Bayou ditch diversion replacement out on the west side there, out by Clear Creek Crossing. Our Parks Department
Yep.
ended up managing that project and paying for it, getting it designed and everything else. So
Oh, see, that's interesting because with the ditch company I'm involved in, that is not the case, and it's the burden is on us according to our bylaws.
right.
And so I think that would be interesting as well to sort of define some of these things where the city is not liable, because that would be something I'd like to see owners and ditch companies come into compliance on.
Sure.
So anyway,
So I think as a short-term thing, if you know people that are having an issue, have them call the city and submit a service request.
okay,
And then we can have either our public works guys or our stormwater coordinator, Bill LaRoe, go out and check it out and see if it really is an issue or if there's just something else going on.
okay, and what would be would it just be Public Works that I would be contacting, or should I contact you, or?
We have a thing called a service request. If you go on our website, you can just click on service request, and there's a whole thing you can fill out.
Awesome.
So that's probably the best way, because then we can route that around to all the various folks.
And is that at Public and Works if I click on that, or is that directly on the?
I think it's on the city website. I've never filled out a
Should be on the,
service-
I think, the front page.
The front page,
There should be
okay.
a button for
Okay,
service
so it's a
request.
service request. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councilman Urban?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I think this is really great that we have this laid out like this. I guess I have a couple questions that relates to previous events. How has this plan helped us in the 2017 hailstorm? What was the role that this plan played in that disaster?
So hailstorms are difficult to plan for and difficult to respond to. What it shows is that it shows that we've put some thought into how we would respond to those. And so what our guys in Public Works do when that storm hit, they start scrambling around, making sure the streets are open. We rely on police department who's out driving around. So it's a lot of that kind of stuff. Make sure that we know where drainage culverts tend to get plugged, and so they run around to those locations. So we have some of that kind of, that's our response, if you will, to what's in the plan, and part of our sort of standard operating procedure when we get an event like that. So the hailstorms are hard because they just happen, and you just hope you get out of the way kind of thing. There's not a lot we can do as a city to mitigate a hailstorm happening. Have a building department in place that takes care of the permits, and having the guys now that we've got on contract, they can staff up immediately if something like that happens, which is similar to what we did in 2017.
Appreciate that answer. As it relates to the other sort of parties that are listed in this document, the schools and the assisted living facilities, have they been notified, or is there any sort of pre-approach to those entities that they're listed in this? If there's an incident, this is what we expect of them, or is there any sort of pre-communication with those facilities?
So a lot of the school districts are one, they had participants as part of our planning committee. So they were there. There's just a handful of annexes because that's the jurisdictions that were there.
Sure.
But there were a lot of fire districts that were part of it. West Metro was part of it. A lot of the other guys were part of it. The school districts were part of the planning committee. The individual like nursing homes and stuff are not part of it, but we've got information in our emergency operation plan. The city does on how we would respond to those kind of things. To reach out to those folks. And then, we've identified the 12 critical facilities that we have in a floodplain. And so our floodplain response in our emergency operations plan isn't as robust as I'd like it to be. So that's one of the things I want to work on when I get time, is to have some more specific things to do. Like if this happens, close this bridge, make sure people can get around and these are the folks that we need to alert. I don't think we have any nursing homes or, large enough child cares that they're tracked. The individual things in houses we don't track, but those bigger ones that we track, I don't think we have any of those in the floodplain, but I'd have to go back and look at that data.
And then you mentioned the districts, I didn't see anything regarding the sanitation or water districts. How are they tied into this, or what's their role as far as mitigating the hazards?
I can't remember if they were on the planning committee or not. Some were. I think there were some of the utility districts that were on the planning committee. Some of the ditch companies were like on the planning committee and stuff, I believe. It was hard this year because we're all looking at screens.
Mm-hmm.
We never met in person, so it was hard to keep track of who all was there. I don't know that we've got the water and sewer districts factored into what's in the plan. I think they're an emergency operation plan.
Okay.
The various water and sewer districts are as people that we've got to contact, we've got names to call and those kind of things.
Okay. That's all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Hulteen.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Westberg, for the presentation. I'm going to just open with a joke that Patrick Goff will understand. There's no plan for mitigating beavers in here, and that's our most recent flooding incident that we've had in the city. So, so two actual real questions that I have. One is, I know, so in my district, principally like from about Pierce Street to, I don't know, about Carr, along Clear Creek, there's a pretty steep embankment on the south side of the Clear Creek, and then it's similar in sections of District 3, I believe. Is there any plan to address, I know some of my constituents who happen to be my neighbors are oftentimes really concerned about when there's a lot of flooding, about trees falling down those embankments, or if there's like severe windstorms. And a lot of that embankment property is not private property, but is my understanding a lot of it is the city, and I'm just sort of curious if that's something that you guys have discussed.
Yeah, about half of our floodplain is city-owned, which is a huge bonus for us because we can control it, and we get 1,100 points or 1,200 points for having that situation in the CRS program, because there's a recognition that if we as the city control it, we can do that. When the storm hit in 2009, that windstorm knocked down a ton of trees along the Greenbelt. If you had ever walked along the Greenbelt before and after, it was like daylight opened up. And the Mile High Flood District actually has a maintenance program that we called on, and they provided contractors at their expense to come in and mitigate all those trees. So they are a great partner, not in just figuring out the floods and planning those and mitigating those, but also in helping us maintain those major drainage ways to make sure that they can still convey the water. We do have a couple of locations where we've got storm sewer that goes down the bluff, if you will. I call it a bluff. We can call it the ridge that goes down the ridge. And we've actually replaced two of those locations in the time that I've been here, in the 14 years I've been here, because they were failing. So we replaced those with a much sturdier kind of pipe and the way it's put in the ground and those kind of things. We tend to try to not have the water just pour over the bluff because it causes erosion of other things. And again, if someone's got a problem on their property that's specific to that kind of thing, again, submit a service request, and we'll try to follow up and track down what might be an issue to see if it is our property and if it's our responsibility, or if it's theirs. And if it's theirs, we'll try to offer suggestions and try to help them come up with some solutions.
That's good to know. I will let neighbors know that if they express concerns. And my second question, the 10th item here on the draft recommendations around xeriscape and conversion, or streetscape conversion to xeriscape. I'm wondering if that's a conversation that's also taking place within Parks and Recreation in terms of prioritizing xeriscaping when we're doing xeriscaping and native plantings, if Parks and Rec was part of that conversation as well, or if it's just really looking at the streetscaping.
They were. Especially our Zach Lovato, who joined us a few years ago, was super heavily involved and has been an amazing resource in designing the landscaping for Wadsworth. There was also a young man, John, and I'm going to space on his last name, that was our landscape enforcement guy one summer, and we leaned on him pretty heavily. Now he's actually working for our Parks Department, doing something over there, I think, maintenance or something, might be a supervisor. But so part of that was to, with Wadsworth, we are xeriscaping Wadsworth. We're not going to have green lawns along the corridor. We're going to have other types of landscaping and stuff that we think is going to turn out really nice, but uses way less water than the normal sod streetscape would be. If this goes really well, there may be a conversation about is it financially worth it over time to replace some of the other sodded areas that are streetscape and replace those with these xeric kind of materials. So that's why we put Wadsworth down as a pilot project to see how, what's the cost related to what we would have done normally. What's the long term? It takes more maintenance to take care of that xeriscape. Yards are easy, just run a mower down them. So there's more maintenance involved, but hopefully that water offset and just the impact it's going to have on how nice it looks along the corridor is going to be a benefit. And so that's why we kind of put Wadsworth down as a pilot project.
Well, I'm glad to hear you guys are looking at that long term, and it just encourages we're looking at the cost benefits to recognize that the water savings is an intangible savings that really outweighs sometimes what the cost is compared to maintenance. So I really hope that that's a program that we can move forward regardless of how it goes on Wadsworth. So thank you.
Yeah, if it goes well, I hope to convert my front yard at home, because it's the only yard I have, and it's like 40 feet by 6 feet or 8 feet, to xeric and try to mimic what we're doing along Wadsworth and borrowing some of those ideas and stuff.
Thank you. Councilmember Urban.
Thank you. One thing regarding that area, the slope going up to the houses, so to speak, that appears to me to be somewhat of a wildfire risk in the sense that it's close to properties and it's the trees have been somewhat cut down below, but along the slope, so to speak, there's a lot of underbrush and whatnot. And I previously tried to reach out to the fire department, but didn't get a response. So how does wildfire, mitigation, or do we have any sort of specific areas we've identified? Yeah, that would go up. No, that's okay.
We do identify wildfire as a possibility in Wheat Ridge because of the green belt. And certainly I'd have to go back, that's not part of the annex that I remember off the top of my head, but we could certainly look at that. Or we could look at the information that Jefferson County has in the main plan for wildfire mitigation stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly the stuff that works in the mountains works in the city also. So if people, kind of clean out that understory and do some things on the property that they own, then that would certainly be a benefit.
It's basically Wadsworth to Otis along 40th Avenue. There's, all that tree down below, and then everybody has a tree next to their house. So.
Yeah.
And then I noticed that cyber attacks was kind of the only non-dirt related issue listed. Like everything else was God, and we're just stuck with one item on cyber attacks. It seems like EMPs. I'm not an expert in any of this, but it seems like there's a lot more disaster issues other than that. But is there a reason? It's just sort of natural causes.
So yeah, there was a lot of debate on whether to even include cyber attacks, because this is a mitigation plan for natural hazards. It's
Okay.
not for all the other things. And so there was a lot of debate about whether we put pandemic in or not. 5 years ago we thought, why would we? Well, now we all know why. And that's a quasi-natural disaster, a pandemic, but it's not sort of an act of God, if you will, like some of the old contracts used to read. So cyber attacks was something that they went back and forth on. They decided to go ahead and leave it in there anyway because it does have a big impact. If we lose all our computers at the city, it's a big deal. CDOT lost all their computers a couple of years ago, and it shut them down for 3 or 4 months just about. It was a real struggle to get anything out of them. Important kind of thing, documents and stuff. So it is a big deal, and so I think that's why it was included anyway, even though it's not a natural disaster. It's just some of the folks really pushed for it.
And this is my last question. I found it kind of interesting. There's 2 items listed in the assets. One is the Ute Ladies Orchid. I can't say that word. Orchid.
Just orchid.
The Earth Star fungus. And so my question is there some sort of consultant or somebody we could work with to make sure that we have a clone of those, or some way to, make sure we have a plan in place to not lose those?
Yeah, Parks is all over that. So I often asked Margaret, who was our previous, I called her the queen of the plants, to go show me where they were, and she said, no, your feet are too big. So she wouldn't show me where they were. It's not something we publish because we don't want people going to look at them and
not at all.
killing them.
No.
Kind of thing. But yeah, Parks is on the orchid stuff. The fungus is a new thing. I'm not sure if they're involved in that or not, but definitely the orchid is a big deal for our Parks Department. It's a big part of how they manage the open space.
Okay. That's it. I just wanted to make sure that as much as this is a plan, I also, like you mentioned, we have sort of, standard operating procedures and that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I would like to see one of those one day, the orchid.
Yeah. The best way is to probably Google it and look it up and see a
Oh.
picture of it. They're honestly, they're like this tall and the flowers like this big. If you're blind like I am, you'll never see them. Somebody who's a little better at seeing things would probably see it. My wife would see all of them, but But I've never seen one, and I think looking them up on a computer is probably the best way
You,
to go.
you can see him. Zach, we'd be happy to give you a tour.
Appreciate it.
Let,
Thank
let
you.
me know. And we do, Mr. Urban, we do also have a wildfire management plan that addresses the Greenbelt and Lewis Meadows. It's unfortunately a little outdated probably at this point. It was in cooperation with Wheat Ridge Fire at the time, and Arvada Fire, and Parks and Rec, of course. So I'll talk to Parks and Rec and see if this is something maybe we need to update.
Thank you. Councilwoman Hulteen? Sorry. Hutchinson?
Close, thank you. What I've known, when there have been disasters, there can be no power, no TV, no anything, okay? So do you have different sirens to reflect what could be going on to let people know?
So about half of the emergency warning sirens that we have are actually solar powered with battery backup kind of thing. So the trickle charges during the day. If they ever sign them off, then it draws on that battery power. It doesn't actually draw on the panel. So those as long as we've got power to PD, which is now mostly coming from Jeffco Emergency Operations, they can broadcast on the sirens that have that. We do have sirens that are directly connected to power. That if we lost power citywide, then actually I think those sirens also have battery backup, so those would work too. So those do have battery, but it's just a different method of charging the battery. So one way is through direct power, the other way is through the solar panel. So the sirens will work up to a point. You know, at some point the batteries will die, but the batteries allow for quite a bit of time to scream at folks to do things.
And you can put messages on them too. So it's not just a siren.
Oh,
But
talking.
yeah, you can, a talking
Yeah.
message set,
Yeah.
yep. So you can identify certain neighborhoods and what to do and
Right.
what the threat is.
Because that's what I've seen, like, you know, down south with the floods and things that are going on, they have no power and things.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you get to let people know?
Yep.
You know, vacate or whatever like that?
Yeah, one of the things in our emergency operation plan is if we were to have a flood that was identified, you know, we've got, the water's going to hit in 30 minutes or an hour or whatever it is, then one of our things is we actually send police cars out to go knock on people's
Yep.
doors and do things. The sirens primarily warn people outside of their houses, so that's why they're concentrated along the greenbelt and stuff. We can cover the whole city, but they're not really intended to be heard inside your house, because if you've got really good windows and you're far enough away, you're probably not going to hear that, but it's mostly to alert people that are outside. And then, of course, if you sign up for Code Red on your phone, you'll get those alerts that way, too.
And I also believe that it's a good thing you come back yearly to update on what the plan is, if there's been something that went on, how that was handled and things, just to keep us, you know, abreast.
Yeah, we have enough things going on floodplain related that during those floodplain updates, I'll be able to, or during those processes and the floodplain stuff, we can provide that annual update, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Nosler-Beck?
This isn't really a question, but also in the outreach that we talked about before with the floodplain mapping, just with the new ordinance that we passed that prohibits tents and makeshift structures, if we can work with the homeless navigator on educating folks on what those new lines are, because we won't have addresses to send out letters.
Thank you. Councilwoman Weaver?
I was just curious, in the agricultural community, we have plans for moving animals in case of disaster, and typically that would be like a county fairgrounds and things like that. And I was just curious if it's worthwhile or if we have a program that sort of educates people, because there are a lot of people with a lot of animals in this community, and I'm not sure if they needed to move their house, or I'm just curious if we talk to people about plans of evacuation, or if there would be a need for such a thing. I'm just curious.
So part of what our police department partners up with back there, not necessarily her, but somebody over there, we partner up with Jefferson County Emergency Management over there. And we have an annual tabletop exercise. This year it was both tabletop and on Zoom, so we learned a lot of things that we can improve on under that circumstance. But it's and it's almost always a flood, because that's what we're all mostly worried about down here in the city. And so we run through a thing of, oh, looks like water's been forecast. We need to activate the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center. We start who needs to be called, who needs to be there physically, who can be remote, how do we get those folks tied in? And so they do that. And one of those things is, okay, where is the flood? What places are available for large animal storage or whatever they call it, evacuation. And the fairgrounds is clear, but this particular road's washed out, so we got to send them around this way. So it's super detailed, as if we were having a flood disaster. And every like 30 minutes, they'll stop everything and say, okay, it's an hour later, and now here's the new news, and we've just lost the bridge at Youngfield, and so now what are we going to do, folks? And so it's that kind of really drilled down in detail on how we respond to things as a way for us all to practice on how we do stuff.
I guess I was just curious for the average person, right? Because while I have my personal plan, I am not aware of where I could call if that were an issue and I were trying to move animals or something. And I just was curious if it's worthwhile doing some sort of public outreach on that kind of, have you thought about it, right? Like in the agricultural community, it's all about, do you have your kits ready? And sort of, if you have to move animals, that there's things packed and things like that. I was simply asking the question if that's a worthwhile thing to.
That's not something I've ever done. I don't know if our police department has looked into that kind of situation or not, but we could certainly pass that on to them and see if that's something they'd be willing to.
Just curious.
They'd be the ones responding. I just support them.
Yeah.
Even if we have a flood, I'm just support staff. I'm the guy that pulls up maps and says, don't drive over this bridge, but the rest of these should be okay. But we still said, look under there to make sure it's not washed out and stuff. So it's,
Yeah.
I just provide technical support. They're the ones that would actually respond and do things.
Mr. Goff, do you know
Yeah, we can look at doing maybe some public outreach, but we're lucky to have the Foothills Animal Shelter
Oh, yeah,
in
yeah.
Jefferson County, which we're members of course, and we're on the board. And they take pretty much anything and
Yeah.
everything. And I know they've taken horses when there was fires in the mountains. And
Yeah.
so they're a place to go, if you can't get there for some reason.
And maybe it's just about
maybe not good.
communicating it so that people know.
Yeah, and we can look at doing an article or something in
Yeah.
one of the upcoming connections.
Thank you.
And
Yep.
I'm pretty sure that Foothills actually attends our tabletop exercise that we have too.
Oh, cool, thanks.
We have a lot of folks there.
Councilwoman Hutchinson?
Thank you. Jefferson County Fairgrounds, I mean, they've taken animals from Elizabeth, from Grand County, from wherever. If there's a way to get a contact with Jefferson County Fairgrounds, I mean, they take a ton of animals. I've seen it. So, and I'm glad we still have the fairgrounds. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any further questions? Councilmember Urban, yes, please go for it.
I ask that we move forward with the Jefferson County Multi-Hazard Mitigation Plan and that we encourage council to adopt it.
Do we have consensus? We do, thank you.
And I say encourage council to adopt it because I won't be here.
I'll adopt it for you, Zach. Thank you, Mr. Westerberg. We appreciate your time tonight.
I'll be back on the 8th to ask for formal adoption of the plan.
Okay. We now have staff reports. Mr. Goff.
No additional staff reports this evening. Thank you.
Excellent. Elected officials reports, and I'll let you just raise your hand rather than go around the table. Councilwoman Hulteen.
Thank you. I just want to report out, we had a fantastic inaugural Harvest Festival this last Saturday at Anderson Park. We had lots and lots of people. There was music. We had kids' activities, and we gave away seeds and talked about great harvests. And it wouldn't be possible without good partnership, City Parks and Rec, Jefferson Conservation District, and oodles of volunteers. And I just want to thank everyone who came, and we're excited and hopeful we get to do it again next year. So that's my happy report for tonight.
Great, thank you. Councilwoman Weaver.
Councilwoman Hulteen took my announcement. So I will repeat the same thing. It was just a great festival. The Harvest Festival was fantastic. And I also want to call out Councilwoman Hulteen's effort towards all that. It's been pretty amazing. So thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands, I'm going to move to close our study session, and then we will be going into a special city council meeting directly after. So I am now closing the study session at 7:15, October 18th. And we are now opening the special city council meeting of October 18th. We are called to order. I would ask the Clerk Kirkpatrick to please call roll.
Councilmember Nosler.
Here.
Councilmember Hudson.
Present.
Councilmember Weaver.
Here.
Councilmember Stites.
Here.
Councilmember Urban.
Present.
Councilmember Dozman.
Is excused and absent for the evening.
Thank you. Councilmember Holteen.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Present. And I will note that our mayor is excused and absent for the evening also.
And he's actually going to join us for the executive session on Zoom.
We have one item on the agenda for tonight, and I would like to ask Councilmember Urban to send us into a motion for this.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I move to go into executive session for a conference with the city attorney, city manager, and appropriate staff under Charter Section 5.7B1 and CRS 24-6-402, subsection 4B and F, to receive legal advice on and for a personnel matter, specifically the annual review of the city manager. I further move to return to the open meeting at the conclusion of the executive session to take any actions deemed necessary.
Second.
Point of order. Do we, and this is totally ceremonial because I don't think there's anyone here, but do we need to acknowledge public's right to speak?
I will ask if there's Sorry, my mic was not on. There's no one in the chambers. Is anyone, city clerk, in the Zoom?
No, there's no one online.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman Hulteen. So we do have a motion and a second. Do we have questions about this motion? Discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand.
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, the motion passes by a vote of 7-0.
Vote passes as a vote 7-0. We will now move into executive session. Thank you. We are reconvening the meeting at 8:37 PM. I will ask for Councilmember Urban to give us a motion.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I move to make the following changes to Patrick Goff's employment agreement effective January 1st, 2022. A 10% increase in the base salary to $226,335 annually. 5% increase contribution to the 457 retirement account. Increase in auto allowance from $300 monthly to $500 monthly, and that this increase is the exclusive increase for 2022, and that the city attorney draft the agreement and have the mayor sign that agreement. Does that cover it all?
Yep, authorize the mayor and authorize and direct the mayor to sign the agreement.
Authorize and direct the mayor to sign the revised employment agreement for city manager Patrick Goff.
Second. Is there discussion on the motion? Seeing none?
For the record, sorry.
Sorry, Council.
My only discussion is that, Patrick, we're grateful to have you as our city manager, and we look forward to continuing to work with you.
Councilmember Urban?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Having served with Patrick for the past 8 years, I have learned quite a bit from him. And as I said in the executive session, when I first started, I was more passionate than I was knowledgeable. And now, thanks to you, I'm more knowledgeable. Maybe a little bit less passionate, but just because I understand what goes into all these decisions more so than I did when I first came in. So just want to thank you for your service to the city of Wheat Ridge. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, I would like to call for a vote. All those in favor, raise your hand.
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, the motion passes unanimously 7-0.
6-0.
6-0. You can let the record reflect that Councilmember Weaver needed to.
Oh, we lost Weaver.
Yes, sorry. I apologize for not saying that at the beginning of the meeting. Excellent.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I truly love working for this community. That's why I've been here so long, and with you guys too. It's refreshing to have such a great council and great staff. So thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Goff. And being that there is no other business to come before the council this evening, I will close this special meeting.